Armageddon is an Imperial Hive World in the Armageddon Sector of the Segmentum Solar, with an estimated population between 100 billion and 500 billion people. The massive trade and industrial output of Armageddon makes it a vital part of the Imperium, particularly for the tightly settled worlds of the Segmentum Solar, the very heart of human-settled space. The Third War for Armageddon began exactly 50 standard years to the day after the start of the Second War for Armageddon in 998 M41, and it saw the return of the Ork hordes to Armageddon under the control of the infamous Warlord Ghazghkull Uruk Thraka. He brought with him the forces of three other major Ork Warlords, the Great Despot of Dregruk, Urgok the Unstoppable, and the Over-Fiend of Octarius. They each commanded vast Greenskin forces, led by many other Ork Warbosses, who create the greatest Ork war ever faced by the Imperium of Man. Ghazghkull had not been an idle Ork following his defeat in the Second War for Armageddon, retiring to his stronghold in a network of Ork-controlled star systems in the Urgok Sector. He carried on with the master plan that had been divinely revealed to him by the Ork gods Ork and Mork solar decades before. If the Imperium had made one terrible mistake following the Second War for Armageddon, it was to believe that Ghazghkull had actually been defeated. In truth, what the Ork gods had revealed to the war boss is that to destroy your foe, you must first know him. For Ghazghkull, the Second War for Armageddon had been a way to learn how the Imperium would react and deal with a major invasion. In the 5 solar decades that followed the Second War for Armageddon, Ghazghkull began developing the tactics that he felt would lead to his enemy's ultimate defeat. As he did not want to draw attention to himself, these experiments were carried out on a much smaller stage than the invasion of Armageddon. From 945 till 959 M41, the Imperium received numerous reports of small Ork raids and attacks against Imperial bases and outposts that were led by Ghazghkull Thraka personally. In 962 M41, an Imperial military base on the world of Paka 3 was destroyed by missiles fired from an Ork base hidden within an asteroid. The asteroid entered the star system from deep space and bypassed all Imperial sensors because of its seemingly innate nature before unleashing its potent missiles at the unsuspecting outpost. In 972 M41, the Imperial agri-world of Shagon 17 was overrun by a huge force of Orks, also allegedly under Ghazghkull's direct command. Despite the fact that Shagon's Imperial Guard defenders were equipped with tanks and other armored vehicles, they were decisively beaten by the Orks in a lengthy guerrilla campaign, which rendered the powerful but static Imperial defenses wholly useless. In 986 M41, the Imperial Navy battle cruiser Radiant Way and its escorts were lost with all hands in an attack by Ork pirates, again led by Ghazghkull. The Imperium responded in force, but discovered that all signs of the Ork presence had simply disappeared by the time they arrived in that region of space. Just before the outbreak of the Third War for Armageddon, Ghazghkull allied with the Bad Moon's Ork Warlord Nazdreg Ordegrub, known for having the best mech boys in the galaxy in his employ, to launch an assault on the Imperial world of Besena 4. The Orks used a previously unknown form of teleportation technology that let them maneuver their troops directly onto the planet from a space hulk located a large distance away from the planet. The Imperial garrison was taken completely by surprise, and only the presence of Space Marines from the Dark Angels chapter saved Besena from being overrun by the Greenskins. Ghazghkull left the world of Besena 4 for the Urgok system in order to exploit the planet's natural resources, unaware that Uruk had finally located him and was closing in. The Ork Warlord intended to seize the planet, enslave the populace, and convert it into a giant ammunition factory to fuel his next great war. using teleporter technology supplied by the mech boy Archimedes, Ghazghkull quickly overcame the Human planetary defense forces. Within weeks, the sheer numbers of orcs and the gargants of Ghazghkull's armies had bounded the planet into submission, but Uruk soon arrived, and at the climax of the battle led a squadron of Bane-Blade super heavy tanks into the fray, intending to hunt down Ghazghkull and leave the Ork armies leaderless. However, even these behemoths were not enough to stop the beast of Armageddon, and Uruk's squadron was overrun by Ghazghkull's evil son's allies. Uruk himself was crushed under an Ork battle fortress, and his unconscious body was brought before Ghazghkull himself. Surprisingly, after weeks of torture, Ghazghkull decided that his old nemesis was too much fun to waste. He released Uruk from the stinking dungeons of his space hulk. Ghazghkull soon intended to invade Armageddon once more and wanted to make sure Uruk was there to give him another good fight. 7 years later, Ghazghkull made good on his promise and began the Third War for Armageddon. Following Ghazghkull's first invasion of Armageddon, a long investigation of the planet's readiness and defenses was begun in 948 M41. The Imperial Navy's Sector Command was transferred to the Armageddon system, and the naval facility of St. John's Dock was rebuilt and expanded to accommodate all classes of Imperial Navy warships. 3 permanently manned monitoring stations were established in the outer reaches of the star system named Uruk, Dante, and Manaheim. In Armageddon itself, a military council was appointed by the Administratum to rule over Armageddon, and was made up of high-ranking officials of the Imperial Guard, the Imperial Navy, the Departamentum Unitorum, the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Ecclesiarchy, and the governor of each of the major hive cities on Armageddon. The council was led by General Kurov of the Imperial Guard, a respected veteran of the Bacchus Crusade. From 949 M41 to 978 M41, General Kurov coordinated a series of genocidal campaigns conducted throughout the equatorial jungles between Armageddon Prime and Secundus, and on the frozen planet of Chosen, to eliminate feral orc infestations which had sprung up in the aftermath of Ghazghkull's invasion. 50 standard years passed, and Armageddon slowly rose from the ashes, its defenses stronger and more powerful than ever before. The first sign of that coming conflagration was a series of Ork attacks on the star systems surrounding Armageddon and other Imperial worlds nearby. 24 Imperial worlds came under attack from Orks, and the astropaths of Armageddon received constant reports of yet more Ork invasions and atrocities. Every consultation of the Empress Tarot prophesied only enormous amounts of bloodshed to come, and the sign of the beast resurgent. Rumors spread that Ghazghkull was returning to have his vengeance, and after the Imperial Navy's Task Force Trajan was presumed lost battling the Orks in the Desdena system, General Kurov sent an astropathic call for assistance to nearby Astra Militarum regiments and Space Marine chapters to come to the defense of Armageddon once more. On the day of the feast of the Emperor's Ascension in 998 M41, August's psychic probes registered a massive disruption in the warp as an Ork fleet emerged back into real space, and Ghazghkull's Greenskin horde descended on Armageddon once more. An alert from the Imperial Monitor Station Dante was cut off in mid-transmission as the Ork starships swept past in the hundreds upon ramshackle hundreds. The Monitor Station's final Vox reports indicated that an Ork fleet was moving into the Armageddon system, comprising 50 Ork cruiser and over 300 escort vessels, accompanied by at least 4 space hulks. The Imperial forces of Armageddon were placed on full alert, and 7 Imperial Navy cruiser squadrons, led by the Apocalypse-class battleships His Will and Triumph, departed St. John's Dock in geostationary orbit of Armageddon within 24 hours of the first report of the Ork invasion. The Imperial fleet, under the command of Admiral Barol, entered battle 5 days later, catching the lead elements of the Ork fleet in an ambush around the high-gravity world of Belusoda. 60 Ork attack ships were blasted out of the vacuum by Imperial fire in the initial engagement, without the loss of a single Imperial starship. Then Admiral Baroul's vessels were engaged by heavy squadrons of Ork kill cruisers and swarms of fighter bombers racing ahead of the main body of the Ork fleet. The Imperial starships fought valiantly, their weapon batteries pounding the crewed Ork vessels into scrap, ravening lance beams, incinerating wave after wave of the fighter bombers. Nevertheless, the Ork fleet outnumbered the Imperial Navy's defenders of Armageddon by 6-1, and the Imperial starships were gradually pushed back. The Orks made suicidal runs against the Imperial gunners with unbridled ferocity, losing a dozen of their ships in exchange for a single Imperial vessel. At the height of the engagement, Admiral Baroul received calm bursts from the Uruk and Manaheim monitor stations, warning that 3 more entire Ork fleets were entering the edges of the star system. At the exact same moment, the Triumph was hit by the combined firepower of 5 Ork kill cruisers and crippled by this heavy fire and massed Ork teleport boarding attacks. Realizing that his duty lay in preserving the Imperial fleet for what would be a protracted conflict, Admiral Baroul reluctantly gave the order for a general retreat. The doomed Imperial monitor stations were overwhelmed by the Orks a few hours later. By the last count, the combined Ork fleets entering the Armageddon system numbered in excess of 2,000 starships and at least 12 space hulks, the largest number of space hulks ever to assail a world of the Imperium in its 10,000-year history. Admiral Baroul, his command reduced to just 5 squadrons of cruisers and a single battleship, could do little more than mount hit-and-run attacks against the massive Ork armadas as they moved in system. Imperial reinforcements would later arrive, and then Baroul hoped that the Ork command of space could be challenged with more of a chance for success. As they waited, Baroul's escorts and light cruisers harried the Orks as best as they were able, distracting and drawing off their foes into traps and gravitic minefields. To their dismay, the Imperial Navy vessels encountered dozens of crude asteroid fortresses, or rocks, in the normally vulnerable rear of the Ork fleets. These incredibly heavy armored weapon platforms proved difficult to assault directly, but the very presence of such large numbers of rocks seemed to indicate a complexity of strategic planning among the Orks that had not yet been seen by the Imperium's defenders. Surprisingly, the Orks did not turn aside to capture the orbital St. John's dock. Instead, it was bombarded for 6 days as the Ork fleets moved past, enlivened by repeated attacks from Imperial assault boat squadrons. Ork warriors succeeded in establishing themselves throughout the lower sections of the dock, and though the facility remained under Imperial control, it was rendered virtually useless as a dock for warships by damage from the bombardment and constant Ork raids. Only the arrival of the 2 inquisitorial Ordo Xenos' Death Watch Space Marine kill teams later in the campaign succeeded in driving the Orks back to the isotope storage pits at the base of the orbital station. In the final few solar weeks before the Ork forces landed on Armageddon proper, the planet was in a frenzy of activity. Imperial Titans powered up their ancient plasma reactors and took up defensive positions around the Hive cities. Imperial Guard regiments were mustered and dug in. Space Marines from over 20 chapters moved into the mountains and wastelands to prepare to face the Greenskins. Imperial merchant vessels were commandeered and used daily to run supplies and reinforcements to the planet through the besieging Ork fleet, despite the risk. The very last transport to touch down carried a legend to the people of the world, the old man himself, Imperial Commissar Uruk. The population cheered as for the first time in 20 years, Uruk stepped foot on Armageddon. The Commissar met with the military council that governed Armageddon that night and advised them on Ghazghkull's most recent tactics and strategies. and warned against underestimating the powerful Ork Warlords' abilities. General Kurov had always been renowned for his judgment of men in battle, and he was deeply impressed by Yarik's drive and intelligence. He requested that Yarik take over the leadership of the military council for the duration of the crisis, and to general relief, the Commissar agreed. 6 weeks after entering the Armageddon system, the vast Ork armada went into battle with the Imperial space stations and weapons platforms in high orbit above the world. Those who had hoped that the powerful orbital defenses of Armageddon would keep the Orks at bay were soon proved to be hopelessly in error. The orbital battle raged for 3 full days and 2 terrible nights, but by the dawn of the 3rd day, the skies of Armageddon were filled with the trails of Ork landing pods and the incandescent streaks of their attack craft carving runnels through the clouds. Hive Hades, still a ruin following the previous conflict, was the first to fall. In an act of vengeance, Ghazghkull chose not to fight again at Hades. Instead, the entire Hive city and its inhabitants were smashed asunder by the colossal impact of giant asteroids dropped from the Orks' orbiting space hulks. This act of wanton destruction was but a premonition of the monstrous bloodshed that was to come. As the fires of Hades' destruction lit the eastern horizon, the first Ork drop legions clashed with Imperial defenders near Volcanus, Acheron, and Deathmire. Ground-based defense lasers and missile silos took a terrible toll on the Orks as they landed, but the hulking survivors regrouped and assaulted the defenses with such ferocity that soon more and more of the Greenskin horde was reaching the planet's surface unharmed. Feral Orks swept down from the Paladus Mountains and out of the war's equatorial jungles to join the growing numbers of their more technologically inclined brethren. Where the Imperial defenses proved too strong to be taken by frontal assaults, huge mobs of Orks and their war machines were teleported directly into battle from the space hulks waiting above. As the ground defenses fell silent on the 3rd day of the Ork landings, Yarik ordered every remaining aircraft on Armageddon to be thrown into the battle in a desperate attempt to destroy as much of Ghazghkull's ground troops as possible before they reach the surface. The sudden yellow skies over volcanic Armageddon became interwoven with the twisting trails of thousands of Ork fighter bombers and Imperial thunderbolts and furies as massive dogfights proceeded with maniacal fury. The Imperial aircraft had the advantage in that they could return to their armored air bases to refuel and rearm, whereas the Orks had to reserve enough fuel to climb back up to their starships and space hulks in orbit. Yet the Orks soon secured ground bases and the air battle turned against the brave Imperial pilots as the sheer number of Ork aircraft was brought fully to bear upon them. As the aerial battles reached their climax 5 days after the Ork landings, Hive Acheron fell to the Orks without warning, captured by treachery from within. Reports spoke of the Hive city's power grid being sabotaged and the Orks boiling up from secret access tunnels at the very heart of the Great Arcology. The instigator of these terrible crimes was revealed to be none other than the infamous war criminal and former Armageddon planetary governor Hermann von Straub. He took over the conquered Hive city as its new overlord, announcing that it was his divine right to rule over Armageddon. Ork brute squads stood ready to silence any dissenters who doubted von Straub's new right to rule. Shockingly, much of the old nobility in Acheron welcomed back von Straub as a long-lost prince, choosing to ignore the fact that he had thrown in his lot with some of the most violent Xenos known to the Imperium. At Hive Volcanus, on the same day that Acheron fell to betrayal, massed Ork infantry surged over the 20 square miles of defenses atop Volcanus Mount just beyond the Hive city's outer suburbs. 17 garrison regiments of Armageddon Hive militia were routed, and the Orks captured many weapons and Imperial fortifications fully intact. Volcanus itself soon found itself besieged, surrounded by a ring of orcish power and relentless bounding by captured Imperial macro cannons and barrage bombs. Outside Deathmire, the defense went better. The Titans of Legio Tempesto and Victorum, with their supporting regiments of the Mechanicus' cybernetic Skitarii, virtually exterminated the Orcs' Black Fire tribe in a 3-day battle across the plain of Antherand. But the Orc landers fell from the skies like an endless storm, and the fighting spread across Armageddon like a wildfire until every hive city and factory complex was involved. In many places, Orc attacks were beaten off by the bravery and ferocity of Imperial defenders, but again and again the Orcs regrouped and attacked once more, stretching the defenders to the limits of their endurance and beyond. As Uruk had predicted, Ghazghkull's strategies proved effective. The Orcs kept an iron grip on Armageddon's airspace. Orbital bombardments and fighter bombers pounded Imperial forces wherever they tried to form a coherent battle line, pinning them in place, while further Orc infantry landings were made to surround them. Where the Orcs found themselves outnumbered, they fought with guerrilla tactics, striking at their human foes and then withdrawing into the war's harsh ash wastelands before retribution could arrive. Ghazghkull had learned the lessons of Shagon 17 very well and deliberately prepared so that the fighting was scattered and chaotic, precisely the conditions in which Ork Warbosses thrived, and Imperial regiments were denied the support and coordination that humans depended upon to defend effectively. The only Imperial force which constantly defeated the Orcs were the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. The Space Marines scoured the hinterlands of Armageddon on search and destroy missions to eliminate concentrations of the savage Greenskins at every opportunity. As the battles raged furiously on Armageddon's surface, Ghazghkull unleashed another of his surprises. Dozens of the great Ork rocks encountered by Admiral Barrow's starships began to descend from orbit. Slowed by powerful gravitic force fields, retro boosters, and modified Ork tractor cannons, the Ork rocks made landings in the verdant equatorial jungles and across Armageddon Prime and Secundus. Many were lost to the ground fire or Orky accidents, but each one that survived became a new bastion for the Orcs, a rallying point and a new citadel. As well as the huge guns and missile batteries, the rocks contained giant teleport arrays created by Orkimedes that were similar to those Ghazghkull has used during the Besena campaign. These were employed to teleport down Ork reinforcements from their orbiting fleet, including Gargants and heavy artillery in a seemingly endless stream of greenskins. Commissar Uruk personally led assaults by the Imperial Guard's Cadian stormtroopers, supported by the Titans of Legio Metallica and Legio Ignatum, which destroyed several of the Ork fortresses, but bloody battles around many of the others consumed whole regiments in only hours. For the rest of the war, the Space Marines bore the brunt of eliminating the Ork fortresses where they could, with the Salamanders chapter winning particular honor for their successes against the rocks along the Hemlock River. Mysteriously, the Orcs also made landings in the Fire Wastes and the Deadlands to the north and south of the main settled continent of Armageddon. Even Uruk was surprised, as these grim lands had always been believed to be uninhabitable and without value. Their value to the Ork Warbosses became apparent when weeks later hundreds of tanker-sized Ork submersibles designed by Orkimedes rose from the polluted waters and made landings at Hive Tempestora and Hive Hell's Reach. The surprise was total, and Tempestora fell within days, and the dockyards of Hell's Reach were soon in Greenskin hands. Only a better defiance by Hive Hell's Reach's Ganga militias, with supporting companies of Imperial Guard stormtroopers and Space Marines that had been rushed to the region, prevented the Orcs from overrunning the Hive city during what became known as the Battle of Hell's Reach. It was at Hive Hell's Reach that the Black Templars Ecclesiarch Grimaldus led the defense of the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, which had stood since Armageddon's colonization. Days after the initial Ork landings on the planet, the first major confrontation between Ork and Imperial war engines occurred. A 10-day battle raged over the Diablos factory complex as the gargant mobs of Warlord Berserk and Warlord Scarfang clashed with the titans of Legio Crucius. 6 titans and 8 gargants were utterly destroyed in the fighting, and others needed many months of repair before they were ready to enter combat again. The Diablos complex was wrecked by the battle, its great foundries and machine shops blasted apart or crushed underfoot by the giant robotic war machines. In the aftermath of the battle, Ork speed cults swiftly encircled Hive Infernus, cutting it off from all external aid. Mechanized Imperial counterattacks into the Ash Wastes met with initial success, but when an entire Imperial Guard regiment of Savla Chem dogs was surrounded and wiped out by the Speed Freaks, further attempts by the Imperial defenders of Infernus to break out from Ork encirclement were abandoned. As the defenders pondered how to lift the Greenskin siege, reports came in of a vast Ork horde rounding the Paladis Mountains from the northeast. Soon the horde was visible from the Hive spires, a great sea of greenskin warriors which seemed to fill the empty expanse of the Ash Wastes to overflowing. Towering Ork gargants strode through the tide, like dreadnoughts rolling on a sea of green doom. The war chants of the Orks could be heard from over 20 miles away, the ground shaking with the horde's progress. Even worse, the sea of war banners swaying over the Orks bore the personal glyph of Ghazghkull himself. The Adeptus Arbites arbitrators within the city soon moved to secure the Hive, turning back or outright executing any who failed in their duty to the Emperor. As Ghazghkull's Ork army came within range of the city, the great siege guns that had survived the orbital bombardment pounded them, lobbing 1,000-pound shells into the mass of greenskins until return fire from the orbiting space hulks smashed them apart. In the brief lull that followed, Ghazghkull delivered to the defenders of Infernus a messenger. It was Colonel Gortar of the Chem Dogs, horribly mutilated and missing both his eyes and hands. The message the blind and crippled Colonel bore was a simple one that would be heard many times in the months to come across Armageddon as the war only escalated: surrender or die. High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars chapter and 3 full crusades of his Space Marines answered the plea for aid from the besieged world of Armageddon. The Black Templars fought bloody campaigns throughout the ash wastelands of Armageddon, but it was in space that the greatest contribution was made to the defense of the world. The 3 Black Templar Crusades assembled at a chapter keep on the world of Fergax and set course for Segmentum Solar. Upon arriving at the war-torn world of Armageddon, Helbrecht's experience of commanding great fleets made him a natural leader of the assembled Adeptus Astartes starships, while Black Templars marshals Rickard and Amalric took their crusades to the surface of Armageddon. The war in space was bitterly fought, with Helbrecht leading many storming actions aboard Ork space hulks. The Imperial Navy fleet, under the command of Admiral Barol, began to whittle down the massive fleet of Ork starships and space hulks, and the reduction of Ork ground reinforcements eventually began to toll on the Greenskins' war effort. By the commencement of the Season of Fire, where the surface of Armageddon becomes hostile to all life because of extreme volcanism, the fighting between Orks and humans had boiled down to an uneasy stalemate. The Black Templars' success in planting the Ork invasion was shattered when Helbrecht's crusade returned to the space hulk Malevolent Dread. Earlier in the orbital engagements, this hulk had been heavily bombarded by the Black Templars' battle barge Light of Purity and damaged by charges planted by Black Templars boarding parties. Finally, Helbrecht decided to put an end to the hulk once and for all, and gathered his crusade and all of his sword brethren Terminators to launch a massive boarding assault. An assault of this kind had never before been attempted on such a scale, but Helbrecht was determined to put an end to the gargantuan space-borne monstrosity. The first stage of the assault was a teleport attack led by the Black Templars Terminators. The Terminators established a perimeter to allow the rest of the Templars' forces to board the hull. The Ork response was immediate, and the Terminators came under heavy assault. Casualties mounted, but Helbrecht was determined to make room for the reinforcements. Thunderhawks and boarding torpedoes made it to the hulk and joined the fighting at the perimeter. The Terminators held the Orks at bay, but it was a tenuous achievement at best. The second phase of the mission began as the Crusade organized into strike teams to lay the heavy thermal charges that would tear the malevolent dread in two. Helbrecht himself would lead the most important team. Despite having been wounded several times already, Helbrecht was determined to plant the charges that would initiate the chain reaction and destroy the Hulk once and for all. Along with his command squads and the Templars' Emperor's champion, Vospa, Helbrecht pushed deeper into the Hulk. The Terminators had held the Orks at bay during the first phase of the battle, and during the second phase they led the advance, forming the spearhead of the Templars' forces as they fought their way through the twisting corridors of the Hulk. Once they abandoned their relatively secure firing lanes, however, casualties began to increase yet again, but with the support of the entire Crusade, the Terminators managed to press through the Ork defenses as more and more strike teams broke off to complete their individual objectives. The Templars' forces became ever more vulnerable to sudden ambush and attack. It was as the Templars broke into a cavernous gap between two of the ill-fitting starships that made up the Hulk that the Orks launched their largest assault yet. Over 1,000 of the green-skinned monstrosities threw themselves into the bolt of fire laid down by the Templars, heedless of their own losses. An audible crack sounded as the Orks smashed into the Templar line. Their advantage lost, the Templars nevertheless managed to hold the line. Vospa and Helbrecht led the counterattack, scything into the Orks with unmatched skill, building a pile of Ork dead at their feet. Slowly the tide of battle turned as the Templars reformed behind their champions to cut through the Ork horde. As the two mighty warriors slashed their way through the Orks, they came upon the largest of the foul creatures, the Space Hawk's Warboss, who tore through the swirling melee, cutting down warrior battle brothers wherever he went. Filled with righteous fury, the Emperor's champion Vospa called the massive Ork to account and faced the creature in one-on-one combat. Each Templar whispered a prayer to the Emperor as Vospa and the Ork Warboss crossed blades, praying for their champion, who was the very embodiment of all that the chapter held dear. Vospa attacked the Ork Warlord with huge two-handed sweeps of the chapter's famed black sword, driving the creature back step by step and slowly gaining the upper hand. But as the Warboss reeled back from a powerful overhand blow, it became enraged and recovered with inhuman speed, driving Vospa back, and though the Emperor's champion met every blow of the Orcs' sword, he could not stop the creature from barreling into him. Knocked off balance, Vospa could not stand aside as the Warboss split his skull in two. The champion's fall was the turning point of the battle. Despite High Marshal Helbrecht's best efforts, the Templars faltered and the Orks redoubled their efforts. The High Marshal was forced to the ground, swarmed by dozens of greenskins. His command squad pulled him clear, but an Ork chopper was buried in his chest armor. As the Templars fell back, many were brutally cut down, and the casualties for the chapter went from bad to horrendous. Many groups of Templars found themselves cut off as the teleporter arrays of the Light of Purity overloaded with the strain of teleporting units back on board. Without an effective defensive perimeter, there was nothing the Crusade could do to rescue the stranded squads, leaving them to do nothing but try to sell their lives as dearly as possible. By the time the Light of Purity pulled away from the Space Hulk, almost half of Helbrecht's crusade had been lost, and Helbrecht himself had been critically injured, only his enhanced body keeping him from joining the Emperor. Finally, with Armageddon's season of fire upon the combatants, the fighting on the planet's surface finally stalled, as the Orks found it difficult to advance in the face of the world's rampant volcanism. Becoming bored by the growing stalemate, Ghazghkull quickly ran out of patience. He resurrected Makari once more, but this time spoke directly to the newly reincarnated god for the first time, stating that as a true Ork, he wouldn't apologize, but that he had been wrong about some things. He showed Makari the holy war he had created on Armageddon, but admitted it could be so much greater. At that moment, a Leman Russ battle tank appeared, blasting a hole in Ghazghkull's chest. Ghazghkull was saved by Makari, who crawled inside the tank to murder the crew within. Seeing the incident as a message from the gods, the recovering Ghazghkull admitted he had been wrong to both Makari and Gork and Mork. He left the conquest of Armageddon to his generals and went in seeking something more entertaining. The Space Hulk, believed to be the flagship of Ghazghkull Thraka, the perversion of pain, departed Armageddon orbit along with the bulk of the remaining space-borne Ork forces, swearing a mighty oath to hunt down and slay Ghazghkull before he could threaten the Imperium again. High Marshal Helbrecht took his remaining Crusade forces and pursued the Greenskins, but the Black Templar fleet did not leave alone. The hero of Armageddon, Kamasayarik, petitioned High Marshal Helbrecht to allow him to accompany the Black Templars alongside a hand-picked force of elite Imperial Guardsmen, and as a sign of the esteem in which Helbrecht held Yarrick, the High Marshal granted his request. The Third Black Templar Crusade on Armageddon was led by Chaplain Grimaldus, who had just recently been raised to the position of Ecclesiarch after the death of his mentor Mordred. Under the direction of the High Marshal, he led over 100 of his battle brothers into some of the most horrific battles to take place on Armageddon. After a score of successful campaigns, Grimaldus gathered his forces and charged towards Hive Hell's Reach, which was besieged at the time by thousands of Orks, who had swarmed up from the icy deadlands in the south using Archimedes submersibles, initiating the terrible Battle of Hell's Reach. The Black Templars stood their ground at the colossal building known as the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, a vast basilica dedicated to the imperial cult that had stood since the earliest days of Armageddon's colonization. The Orks attacked with devastating force, but Grimaldus and his Astartes held out for almost 2 months. The Orks finally penetrated the Space Marines' defenses and stormed the temple, destroying irreplaceable relics, infuriating the Templars even more. Many of the Hive militants and Imperial Guardsmen supporting the Space Marines turned to flee, but were rallied by the sound of Ecclesiarch Grimaldus' booming voice echoing through the temple. "I have dug my grave in this place, and I will either triumph or I will die." The battle degenerated into a bloody melee in the heart of the building, ending only when the entire edifice began to crumble, eventually collapsing around the combatants. All were feared lost until a day later when Grimaldus crawled from the ruins, bearing the last relic of the temple and vowing that all would remember the lives that had been lost in the defense of Armageddon. The Black Templar apothecaries who examined him later were amazed that Grimaldus had survived, much less found the strength to climb from the ruins. When the war finally ended, the citizens of Hive Hell's Reach honored him with the title of Hero of Hell's Reach. The Celestial Lions are a successor chapter, raised from the gene stock of the Imperial Fist's Primarch Rogaldorn. They were created during an unnamed founding during the latter years of the 38th millennium. During the next 4 millennia, the Lions proved to be a resolute chapter and true Scions of Dawn, fiercely defending the realms of man from the enemies of the Emperor. But the Lions' fierce pride and moral principles that have always governed the chapter's thoughts and deeds may have contributed to their own destruction. Events that were set in motion over 5 solar decades earlier during a routine assault on the world of Qatar in 948 M41, where 5 companies of the chapter heeded the call of Inquisitor Apollyon to cleanse the planet from chaos uprisings. When the Lions left the planet, Apollyon ordered an orbital bombardment, wiping out the 8 billion population of the planet. The Lions denounced Inquisitor Apollyon and his actions, and that proved to be the chapter's undoing in the wake of the events that unfolded during the Third War for Armageddon. The Manaheim Gap in Armageddon was a canyon running through the mountains north of Hive volcanoes. It was a rent in Armageddon's priceless earth, torn open by the slow, active dance of the world's tectonics. Any who dwelled there for more than a handful of solar weeks knew that Armageddon was not a world that slept easy, whether due to greenskins, dust storms, or yet another war. The Celestial Lions were told the canyon had to be assaulted, for it was a nest of mechanical heresy where the aliens were constructing their gargants. Hive Volcanus' forces had to strike before the alien gargants became active, or the tide would forever turn against the city's defenders. The Astra Militarum could not be trusted to deal such a surgical strike, nor could the Hive City organize a mass withdrawal and redeployment of its deeply entrenched guard elements to make it a plausible option. The task fell to the Lions. Primitive void shielding protected the site from orbital bombardment. The Lions had to strike over land without drop pods, marching into the ravine alongside their tanks, attacking in battalion regiments like some echo of the Horus heresy and the millennia of Cold Warfare before it. The Lions reconnoitered, of course. They scouted and watched, deeming Imperial intelligence reliable. None of the alien guard walkers were infused with life, but time was not on their side. Every solar hour they spent behind their fortress walls was another solar hour that brought the Gargant machines closer to awakening. 500 Celestial Lions Astartes attacked. The last half of the chapter went to war, knowing that the enemy numbers were beyond the capability of the Imperial Guard to confront. They chose to bring overwhelming force and to strike fast and hard, seeking to counter their crippling inability to strike from the skies. 500 Space Marines were involved, and some chapters had taken whole walls with a quarter of that number. The Lions commanders were right to commit their full fury. Any chapter master would have done the same. There was no possible way the enemy could have known such a force was coming to destroy them, and there was simply no way to prepare for an assault by 500 Space Marine warriors. Strike with ferocity and destroy the enemy, and then fall back before getting entrenched in a full-scale battle. It should have worked. In truth, the Gargants were not sleeping. They were simply waiting. Despite the setback, if that was all they had to deal with, the Lions might still have fought their way clear without being slaughtered. They might have even won, despite dying to the last man. The Lions' gold battle tanks raged skywards, streams of lace cannon fire, bursting thin shields, and scoring holes in the hulls of the towering enemy war machines. War leaders shouted orders in control of their warriors even in the heat of battle, establishing where to strike, where to push through the Orks' lines, where to move in defense of tank battalions threatened by enemy infantry. Even when the Gargants awoke, the last half of a noble chapter still fought to win. They would purge the canyon at the cost of their own lives. Dawn himself would have stood with them that day, but the tide truly turned. The enemy ambush unfolded further as greenskins spilled from the earth, pouring in hordes from warrens within the canyon sides and the rocky ground. There were thousands of them, roaring beneath fanged war banners and standards made from crucified celestial lions taken in other battles. This fresh army surged into the ravine, fell in it like sand in an hourglass, broken all hope of withdrawal and eliminating any chance of victory. Somehow the Orks knew that the Lions were coming. There could be no other reason to bury whole war clans under the rock, waiting for such an assault. Their overlord was a beast clad in scrap work armor, the biggest greenskin the lions had ever seen. He ate the dead, his own and the lions. War leader Vorlark buried the war sword Jehera in the beast's belly and carved 3 meters of stinking alien guts free. It did nothing. The lions fought back as they fell, but they knew they were betrayed. A traitor, somewhere, had fed word to the enemy, and the orcs made the most of their ambush. But soon, the extent of the treachery was revealed. A sniper fire, deadly accurate, rained down from the canyon walls. Not the solid shell rattle of greenskin projectile throwers, for the lions knew how the orcs fought. This was viciously precise laser weaponry, knifing through their officers' helms from above. Death speakers, war leaders, spirit walkers, even bride leaders cut down with fire too precise, too clinical to be that of the greenskin enemy. It took the lions 4 solar hours to fight free. They carved their way back the way they came, abandoning a sea of dead tanks, slain battle brothers, and butchered green enemy bodies. The gene seed of half the chapter lay rotting at the bottom of that canyon, unharvested by the lions' life binders and defiled by the thousands of foes they left alive. The lions had fled from the field, and the most valiant battle the celestial lions ever fought was that retreat. Never had they faced such odds, and the last of them cut their way free, pulling their brothers from the storm of blades, and fell back to their fortress with the enemy at their heels. The Xenos flooded their forward base before most of their survivors had even arrived. The Celestial Lions had to fight just to escape their own falling fortress. Even then, for every gunship that raced free, another 2 were shot down in flames. The survivors of the Celestial Lions returned to Hive Volcanus. Only 3 officers were left at dusk of that day. 3 officers above the rank of Pride Leader, Death Speaker Jolkara, who called Ecclesiarch Merrick Grimaldus of the Black Templars brother, War Leader Vakembe, the last surviving captain of the chapter, the Life Binder Kituk, the Lion's only living apothecary. The chapter's future rested on his skills, but the final insult was yet to play out. The last gasp in this drama of shame and treachery occurred later that same terrible evening. The Celestial Lions' territory inside the city was a cold foundry, nearly lightless, with a perimeter of rockreed patrolled by the remaining warriors. Life Binder Kituk did not survive the first night after that terrible defeat. The lions found him at dawn, slouched against the last land raider, shot through the eye lens. The gene seed he had carried was gone, and he would harvest no more. The Imperium needed to know what had happened to them on Armageddon, where they had been betrayed by others who claimed to serve the Emperor. The remaining Celestial Lions then determined to die on Armageddon alongside their brothers, as was right and honorable if the chapter could not be revived. Death Speaker Jolkara reached out to Ecclesiarch Grimaldus, a fellow son of Dawn, to know the truth behind their coming last stand, and ensure those that shared the Primarch's blood never spoke ill of the Celestial Lions' fall. Jolkara sent a lone Storm Eagle from Hive Volcanus to seek help from the hero of Hell's Reach, the zealous Grimaldus, who had recently held the besieged Hive Hell's Reach against thousands of orcs. The Ecclesiarch sent a secure Vox message to the Eternal Crusader. Grimaldus met with High Marshal Helbrecht aboard his flagship, producing for him the hand-held holo recorder which relayed the dire message from the Celestial Lions' Death Speaker. The High Marshal inquired as to what the Ecclesiarch hoped to accomplish. Grimaldus sought to establish contact with the Celestial Lions to take stock of their losses and, if possible, to destroy those who had betrayed them. But the High Marshal knew in his heart that this would be impossible, no matter how much it appealed to him. The High Marshal warned Grimaldus that he risked dragging the chapter into direct conflict with the Inquisition. The High Marshal sympathized with Grimaldus' cause, for injustice must be stopped and impurity must be purged, but the Eternal Crusader was to set sail in 3 solar days in order to pursue the fleeing Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. But Helbrecht could not overlook that the Celestial Lions' devastating losses for the principal reason he believed his Ecclesiarch's concerns were valid. Justice called to them, and at the very least, the Black Templars wished to learn the truth of the matter. He ordered Grimaldus to go to Hive Volcanus to learn the truth of what had happened. If the Celestial Lions were destined to die, the High Marshal wished to hear the truth of their tale before it was too late. Anyone who trusts an agent of the Inquisition has earned the right to be named naive, Cynric. There is a reason the Adeptus Astartes stand apart from the Imperium, autonomous, loyal to the Empire's ideals, but rarely its function. The Lions' most grievous error was forgetting that. Soon Grimaldus and his charge made their way to Armageddon Prime, where Hive Volcanus was still besieged by the enemy. A lone space marine came forward, bearing the black helm of a pride leader. He knelt before the Ecclesiarch and removed his dark helmet. Grimaldus was greeted by the sight of a face that was a warm, rich brown complexion of a human born to equatorial climes. Though he had never been to the Lions' home world of Elysium 9, he had met many of its dark-skinned sons. They were a culture of hunters, proud from birth to death, true scions of dawn. Tobacco was now the senior surviving lion who led those that remained. The veteran marine explained that there were 96 lions still drawing breath upon Armageddon, and that he had inherited command from war leader Vakempe, he of the spear that hunts hearts, who had been slain 18 solar days earlier. Grimaldus knew Vakempe, a stalwart space marine officer and deadly swordsman. The Ecclesiarch inquired as to the whereabouts of Death Speaker Julkara. The Pride leader replied that he had been slain by the Kine, a Celestial Lions' term for cattle or beasts, the Greenskins. Nearly 24 solar days passed. Tobacco explained that they had swallowed their pride long enough to request aid from the Flesh Tearers and the Black Templars, but the former were as depleted as they were, and the latter were preparing to take the fight out to the stars in pursuit of the fleeing Ork Warlord. The Lions felt they had no right to pick for scraps while being left behind, so they existed by plundering their fallen fortress and looting their own dead. Grimaldus ordered the Lions to finish loading their gunships, then he wanted Tobacco to tell him everything that had happened to the chapter since they made planetfall. It remained to be seen just what Julkara expected of the Black Templar, or what Grimaldus could actually achieve for the Lions. It already felt less like he had been summoned to save the Lions, and more like he had been called to hold vigil, watching over the chapter as it died. The Pride leader's tale was grim. The Ecclesiarch's blood ran cold as Tobacco revealed each new betrayal that had occurred. Grimaldus quickly realized that the surviving Lions meant to die on this world. The Pride leader confirmed this was true. The Lions intended to die alongside their brothers, as it should be. Death Speaker Julkara wished for Grimaldus to know the truth behind their coming last stand and ensure that those who shared the Primarch's blood never spoke ill of their sacrifice. Cynric argued that the Celestial Lions should return to Elysium 9 to endure the shame if they must, as the Crimson Fists endured their shame after the Battle of Ren's World. They had to rebuild their chapter. The galaxy must not lose the Celestial Lions forever. But the remaining Lions scoffed at this suggestion. Their chapter had been savaged beyond resurrection. Men, material, knowledge, all of it was gone. They had nothing to hand down to any generation that would follow them. The remaining Lions refused to flee like cowards, but it was not cowardice Cynric advocated. It was survival. Survival to preserve precious blood and to rise again to fight another day. Grimaldus agreed with both opposing viewpoints, for a glorious last stand was no more less respectable than preserving the infinite value of a space marine chapter. But Grimaldus wondered if Cynric would advocate shame if he was the one facing the prospect of so glorious a last stand. Easier to speak of shame, than endure it, and yet Grimaldus was just as determined that the chapter had to survive. The remaining lions explained to Grimaldus that the Inquisition wanted to silence them, but the Ecclesiarch assured them that this was not the case. They were using the Celestial Lions to make an example. The lions were in fact the most recent casualty in the Inquisition's campaign to rein in the political autonomy of the Adeptus Astartes. The Inquisition tolerated no attacks on its sovereign rights, yet the lions had challenged them, and now all would bear witness to the price of their chapter's rebellion. The sabotages, the conflicting orders, the ambushes, all would lead to the destruction of a Space Marine chapter. Millions of Imperial citizens would hear of how the Celestial Lions were killed on Armageddon. A mere handful would know the truth behind their deaths, and each of those would be Adeptus Astartes officers who would tread with much more caution when they dealt with the Inquisition in the future. The lesson would be learned, just as Inquisitor Apollyon's cronies wished. Digesting this information, Pride leader Dubaku explained to the Ecclesiarch that his chapter would make for the Mannerheim Gap, and that though many of the Gargants were gone, it was still a well-defended Ork stronghold. It remained a cancer in High Volcanis' territory, and it must fall. After hearing their tale of woe, Grimaldus decided that Cynric had been right. The Lions' death would be a disservice to the Imperium, no matter the greatness of their glorious last stand, no matter the heroism of individual warriors as they spent their lives' blood. The Lions argued that this was how they wanted it to end, to finish their legacy in fire, not in the centuries of painstaking laboratory work to preserve their bloodline. They wanted to die as warriors. The Black Templar had only agreed to speak of the Lions' death, and that he understood how it had happened and why they had chosen to act as they did. But now they wished for him to also bless their damnation. The Lions had no surviving death speakers, and so they wanted Grimaldus to bless the warriors of another chapter, sharing the Black Templar's sacred rituals and vowing before the Emperor and Rogal Dorn that their death would be a noble testament to the Imperial Fist's bloodline. Grimaldus looked upon the surviving Celestial Lions, standing amongst them during their desperate, respectful silence. Grimaldus felt he had no choice, could not grant his blessing to the suicide of the chapter, and refused to perform the requested rite upon the Lions. Grimaldus and his charge then departed the Celestial Lions' forward base and made for the Eternal Crusader. He went there to put an audacious plan into motion. The Ecclesiarch knew he could not return to Hive Hell's Reach, for the Season of Fire played its tempestuous games around the city, harsh enough to kill sky traffic, but not quite violent enough to interfere with Vox signals. Time passed as Grimaldus spoke with 81 Astra Militarum officers and 11 naval captains. As his clearance was Rubicon grade, no one dared to question his orders. Cynric questioned the Ecclesiarch's motives, but Grimaldus argued that the Lions' survival would be for the best, and he was depleting Hive Hell's Reach's defenses to march alongside the Lions back into the Mannerheim Gap. The Ecclesiarch explained that the city was vastly over-defended now, with entire battalions sitting idle and awaiting redeployment. Cynric felt that Grimaldus was playing on the people's regard for him. The hero of Hell's Reach called them to war. Of course they would follow, but he was sure it was their war. The Ecclesiarch argued that it was their world, and it was the only chance the Celestial Lions had if they were to survive. The Lions' unseen enemies might well allow them to die in the glory they deserved, but their deaths served nothing but to ease the soreness of wounded pride. The Celestial Lions must not die on Armageddon, and without help, the chapter was doomed. Everything depended on just how fast Grimaldus' forces at Hell's Reach would break out from the storm and redeploy halfway across the world. Arranging for an Imperial Navy shuttle, both Grimaldus and Cynric deployed to the surface of Armageddon, dawn with less than a solar hour away, as they broke cloud cover above the Celestial Lions' ruined fortress stronghold. Grimaldus wondered if the Celestial Lions would have already left their fallen fortress by the time they arrived, marching towards their last stand. The pair of Black Templars descended from the sky to the ground by utilizing their jump packs. Pride leader Dubaku was taken aback by the return of the Black Templars. Grimaldus replied that he thought that the Lions might appreciate the extra bodies. The Ecclesiarch was greeted by General Kiranov of the Armageddon Steel Legion, the acting commander of the Imperial military forces at Hell's Reach. Within the solar hour, a war council was called, ordained before a battalion of raving tanks. The plan was simple. They would march into the Mannerheim Gap and they would destroy anything that moved or breathed. Dubaku stood with Grimaldus at the heart of the impromptu conclave, his anger a palpable thing. He directed his ire at the Ecclesiarch, who he felt had overstepped his authority. The Pride leader did not appreciate these interlopers who threatened to interfere with their personal vendetta and their glorious last stand. He argued with Grimaldus that this was the Celestial Lions' fight and no one else's. Dubaku warned Grimaldus that when the time came, when they confronted the Ork Warlord responsible for so many of his battle brothers' deaths, it would be a lion's blade that killed the creature. Grimaldus vowed grimly that it would be so. And so, the forces gathered from Hell's Reach marched in long armored columns towards the Mannerheim Gap. Every hope they possessed that Mannerheim would be near devoid of Ork Titans was crushed before the first Steel Legion soldier had set foot on the loose rock slopes leading down into the canyon. The enemy was present in grotesque force. Great sockets in the rigging and stanchions along the canyon walls marked the absence of several gargants, but many more were undergoing repair or reawakening after fighting in recent battles. The ravine was choked by multitudes of orcs going about their work, and thousands of moldering corpses piled up into a sea of decaying organic matter. Gold armor, darkened and soiled by waste, showed among the barricades of the looted dead. The dead Celestial Lions had been heaped in undignified repose with the Xenos murderers, and the Ceramite, useless to the junkyard heresy that constituted Greenskin technology, was left to encase the rotting warriors amidst their flesh cairns. The Imperial force advanced over the sea of the disrespected dead, for tearing the barricades down was not an option. The guardsmen climbed and waded through the sea of bodies or rode on the hulls of their tanks. Above the advance rode the gunship fleet, all flanking the 4 remaining Thunderhawks in the Celestial Lions' arsenal. The moment they streaked through the raven's trench, cannon fire began to bring them down in tumbling fireballs. The Steel Legion did not balk at the sight of such a vast enemy horde. They plowed into the enemy's disarrayed ranks, slaughtering them to make room on fields of their bodies for the gunships to land. The first hours of the battle were unremarkable only for their ferocity. The Imperial Guard's massed cannonades devastated the Greenskin war machines. In reply, the Orks butchered the Guard at every point along the advance, where it fell to men and women with bayonets to hold the line. As was so often the way of the Astra Militarum, they had the stronger steel, but the enemy had the stronger flesh. In such a grinding lock of armies, winning and losing was relative. The Imperial force pushed deep into the canyon as hundreds of men and women fell face down into the dirt. Behind the Space Marines lay a graveyard of tanks, practically all their own, all lost to enemy cannon fire. Lining the canyon's walls were the burning metal corpses of towering guard constructs, hauled by missiles and tank shells, melting to slag in the flames of the Imperial Guard's bombardment. Stubber fire rattled against the Ceramite harmlessly, but scythed guardsmen down in droves. Still the Imperials advanced, sloshing through a rising torrent of blood. It was knee-deep on most of the humans, turning all advancement into a sweating wade through filth. Soon the pivotal moment of the battle came upon Grimaldus, as it had so many times before, his heraldry often drawing enemy commanders to him as often as he fought his way to them. It happened again at Mannerheim. Though he tried to avoid it, the largest of the Orks, doubtless hunting the Ecclesiarch by heraldry, launched itself at Grimaldus from behind. It was a thing of blunt fangs, sinewy muscle, and hammering limbs, larger than Grimaldus and both stronger and faster than him. A celestial lion called out to the Ecclesiarch, reminding him that the Ork Warlord was the Pride Leader's kill. Grimaldis faced off against the massive beast, swinging his crozier maul at the foul creature, but the powerful Greenskin moved as if immune to everything thrown against it. Lay's fire lanced off the creature, going ignored against its armor, and equally ignored as the volley scored fingertip-sized holes in its flesh. Celestial Lions charged the creature, but the hulking Warlord countered their feeble assaults with a sweep of his mighty mangling claw. As Grimaldis was driven to his knees and eventually struck to the ground, Dubako finally came between the two combatants with a leap and a roar. He held his hand back, bidding Grimaldis to remain away. The Ecclesiarch had to force himself to obey, something he would never have countenanced in any other circumstance. But they had fought this battle for a bloodline's pride, and here was the moment of reckoning. Dubako beat his blade against his chest plate, staring at the Greenskin Lord in its powered suit of tank armor scrap. Despite the cacophony of battle that raged all around them, Grimaldis could hear the Celestial Lions' words as clearly as if they had left his own mouth. "In whatever underworld your foul breed believes, you shall tell your big-blooded ancestors that you died to the blade of Ikin of Elysium, Lion of the Emperor." No one knew it then, but at that moment, the Pride Leader was the last lion still standing. Dubako attacked, his chainsword worthless against the beast's claw. He had just as little hope of parrying the creature's cudgel with his combat knife, so what he lacked in strength, he poured into speed, never blocking, always dodging. The battle did not pause around the two combatants. Soon both the Pride Leader and the Ork Warlord were bleeding from a score of wounds. The chainsword had found its way through armor joints and plunged into soft tissue. The power claw had mangled the Celestial Lions' armor each time it fell. Soon Dubako was backing away. Fighting such a beast was no task for one warrior alone, no matter the pleasure of pride. Then came a thunderclap of noise as a massive electrical burst turned the air to charged static. Orcs and men in their droves cried out in pain at the sonic boom. The orbital shield was no longer functioning. Somehow, at some point in the hours of melee, while the Ecclesiarch fought with the Lions, the Steel Legion had laid explosives at the base of the Void Shield reactor. The Emperor alone knew when, where, and how. No sooner had the shield imploded, spitting a static charge in all directions, than a powerful and priority channel Vox rune chimed loudly in the Ecclesiarch's retinal display. Grimaldis activated the Vox as he watched the Pride Leader and the Ork Lord stagger around each other, wounded animals too proud to die. Soon Grimaldis heard a familiar voice. It was High Marshal Helbrecht. He informed the Ecclesiarch that the Black Templars were ready to reinforce their position. All he had to do was give the word. Grimaldis informed the High Marshal to blacken the sky. At that moment, the severely wounded Celestial Lion was down before Grimaldis could reach him. The beast clutched Dubako's arm in its mangling claw, crushing it at the biceps before ripping it free. The Pride Leader retaliated by ramming his chain sword in an awkward thrust into the creature's throat. Deflected by armor, it barely bit. His assault came at the cost of his leg, as the iron claw scissored through the limb at the knee, dropping him on his back into the slime. Grimaldis was on the beast's back a heartbeat later, securing himself by digging into the creature's armor with his boots as he wrapped his severed weapon chain around its bleeding, sweating throat. The chain garroted taut, cracking sinew in the beast's throat. The iron claw battered at the Ecclesiarch, sharing chunks of ceramite away. It staggered without toppling, gasped without truly suffocating. Even this, even strangling it with his last remaining weapon, would not kill it. All Grimaldis could do was buy Dubako the moments he needed to crawl free, which he quickly did, and Cynric was waiting, a bolter in his remaining hand. The mutilated Celestial Lion reached up for it, clutching it one-handed in a pistol grip, and aimed it up as he lay back in the sludge. Grimaldis dropped back, not completely, but enough to pull the chain tighter, adding his weight to his strength, and wrenching the beast's head back to bare its throat. The bolter sang once, and the kick of something heavy struck near the chain. With a muffled burst, the Orc's head came free, tumbling back over its shoulders and landing with the Ecclesiarch in the filth. The armored body stood there without anything existing above its neck, still too stubborn, too strong to fall. Once he got to his feet, Grimaldus reclaimed his maul from the fallen beast. Then he tossed the thing's slack-jawed head to Dubaku, where he lay. The battle continued to rage, as the men and women Grimaldus had led there fought their way further down the canyon. Dubaku looked up at the darkening sky as the Black Templars descended in a massive drop-pod assault upon the Mannerheim Gap. The Lion's only reaction was to rise as best as he could and pull his helmet clear. He told the Ecclesiarch to help him stand. He didn't want to meet the High Marshal on his back. Cynric and Grimaldus pulled Dubaku up between them. While they did so, the gods' Vox Link erupted in cheers as Lord Helbrecht blackened the sky with Templar drop pods. Ecclesiarch Grimaldus bid his farewell to the newly installed chapter master Ikin Dubaku of the Celestial Lions, escorted by his surviving few warriors onto the Black Templar strike cruiser Blade of the Seventh Sun, with its course plotted for the distant world of Elysium 9. Dubaku now bore a bionic leg and a noticeable limb, his physiology not entirely adjusted to the augmatic replacement yet. The armor he wore was gold war plate of an ancient Imperial Fists champion, granted as a gift from the Eternal Crusaders' Hall of Memory. His cloak was that of Helbrecht's own sword brethren, red on black, elegantly cast over one shoulder. It was not known of this with the very same cloak Helbrecht had granted to Dubaku when he forced him to take the oath of lordship over his depleted chapter. At his hip, bound by chains of black iron, was the flayed polished skull of the Greenskin warlord they had killed together, an honor indeed to be named on a chapter master's prime trophy. The Black Templars' honor guard, comprised to bid him good journey, consisted of the Ecclesiarch, the newly promoted chaplain Cynric, and the High Marshal's household knights, clad in ceremonial colors. The Ecclesiarch hoped most fervently as time passed that chapter master Dubaku's effort in reconstructing the Celestial Lions and training the generation to follow him continued to go well. Grimaldus knew with grim satisfaction that they would most likely never meet again, as Dubaku was sworn to a life of defending what he could hold, and the Black Templars always sailed forth on the attack against the foes of the Emperor. Many Space Marine chapters responded to the call for aid from Armageddon, including the Black Templars, White Scars, Exorcists, Silver Skulls, Iron Champions, Storm Lords, and the list goes on, their raiment every color under the Emperor's sun. Yet of all those chapters that fought in the shadow of Armageddon's smoke-wreathed manufactorums and hive cities, the populace remember none with the same gratitude that they give to the Salamanders. The Salamanders had been instrumental in Ghazghkull's defeat in the Second War for Armageddon. That victory had cost them dearly. Perhaps it was vengeance that drove the chapter to make such a generous contribution to the Third War. Whatever the reason, almost the entire Salamanders chapter was present in the crucial early months of the war. Under the eye of their bold chapter master Tushan, they fought with determination on the most terrible battlefields. When the din of battle grew quiet and the Ork attacks slowed, the Salamanders did not sit idle, but instead launched several devastating counterattacks against the rocks landed by the Orks along the Hemlock River, preferring the close quarter fighting to be had in the maze of crudely carved tunnels that lay within the interior of the rocks to the long-range duels in the desert. The Salamanders made their mark. By the start of the Season of Fire, 9 rocks had been destroyed by the Salamanders' attacks, killing untold thousands of greenskins. The glory of such battles was one shared with many other chapters, and alone it does not explain the fierce loyalty that the Salamanders engendered in the people of Armageddon. The truth of the matter remains that while some chapters fought for the Emperor and others for the renown and glory to be earned, Tushan and his Salamanders fought each battle to save the lives of the people of Armageddon. For instance, during the Battle of Hive Hell's Reach, the Salamander strike cruiser Serpentine made its way through orbiting Ork armada to vomit drop pods onto the shattered streets of Hell's Reach. Sergeant Vareth, commanding 70 Salamander's battle brothers, fought alongside the Black Templars of Ecclesia Grimaldis. The majority of the Salamanders departed Armageddon following the Season of Fire, but the people of Armageddon will not soon forget the efforts the Salamanders made in their name. The legend that the sons of Vulcan have left behind will surely shine all the brighter with every passing year. The end of the Third War for Armageddon is clouded in mystery. Ultimately, the campaign was considered a narrow Imperial victory as the world remained largely under the control of the Imperium. Word later reached Uruk from the Black Templars chapter fleet in orbit of Armageddon that Ghazghkull had fled the world once the planet's Season of Fire had begun, and bogged down the Orks' offensives, possibly in his command space hulk, the perversion of Bane. With this news, Uruk gathered together his own forces and gave chase alongside the Black Templars crusade fleet as the Black Templars High Marshal Helbrecht began a new Imperial crusade to seek out and finally destroy Ghazghkull. In a daring covert operation conducted by the 13th Penal Legion under the command of Colonel Schaefer, the treacherous former planetary governor Hermann von Straub was killed in the occupied Hive Acheron when he was tackled over the edge of a balcony by the demon-possessed Psyker Lieutenant Cage. Cage had led the 13th Penal Legion into a trap, allying himself with von Straub in his possessed state, but he managed to overcome the demon's will just long enough to tackle the treacherous governor and prevent his comrade's execution. Both men fell to their deaths. Though the war is officially over, fighting still continues on the planet at present. Though Ghazghkull has left the world, pursued by Commissar Uruk with a full Black Templars crusade at his back, the remaining Orks have come to regard Armageddon as a kind of Greenskin utopia or Valhalla, where they can always come to find a good fight. As such, the Imperium must still send more troops into the stalemated battle to keep the planet in Imperial hands and prevent the seemingly permanent Ork infestation from becoming a major threat once more. The state of Armageddon and its surrounding planets is currently dire. Most of the settled planets in the Armageddon system have been ravaged by Ork forces, and with Ghazghkull having fled into deep space, it is likely he will quickly rebuild his forces and carve out a new Ork empire for himself, unless the Black Templars and Uruk prove able to stop him. Not even the great warp storms unleashed by the birth of the Great Rift in 999 M41 could hold the fighting, but they did change its nature. During the period of the Noctis Eterna, reinforcements were cut off for both sides, and those en route to the system were swept into oblivion in the warp. Those combatants who remained on Armageddon were forced to face not just each other, but oncoming waves of chaos demons, at times so desperate were the defenders that Orks and humans fought alongside each other against the greater threat. Such temporary ceasefires never lasted long. By the time the beacon of the Astronomicon burned bright once more, and easy travel through the Immaterium was possible in the Imperium Sanctus, an Imperial relief force arrived to find the landscape of Armageddon greatly changed. At the height of the warp storms, the demonic forces of Tzeentch and Khorne had battled each other as part of the eternal competition in the Great Game. The Orks and Imperial defenders sought cover as titanic greater demons dueled for supremacy. Fully half the planet was reshaped into a hellish landscape reminiscent of many demon wars. A nightmare born of the warp merged with the ruins of a war-torn Hive World. The Imperial reinforcements, led by elements of 9 Space Marine chapters with the Salamanders in overall command, succeeded in halting a demonic ritual that would have brought Angron, the demon primarch of the World Eaters, back to the world that had defied him during the First War for Armageddon. And finally, for a total summary of the war. The Third War for Armageddon that began in 998 M41 was a massive conflict between the Imperium of Man and the largest Ork WAAAGH ever raised, led by the Greenskin Warlord Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. the war was fought on the Hive World of Armageddon, where Ghazghkull Thraka had launched his first attempt to seize the planet exactly 50 standard years before. The conflict eventually drew in portions of over 25 Space Marine chapters, dozens of Astra Militarum regiments, several Titan legions, and caused immense destruction to Armageddon before essentially ending in an extremely narrow Imperial victory, though neither the Imperium nor Ork forces were able to secure complete control over the contested world, and fighting is still ongoing across the planet. Following the opening of the Great Rift in 999 M41, Armageddon was cut off from all outside contact for the duration of the Noctis Eterna. When the beacon of the Astronomicon could once more be seen in the Armageddon system, Imperial relief forces arrived to discover that a third faction had joined the war, the demonic legions of Khorne and Tzeentch. The Chaos forces were as intent on fighting each other as the mortals present on the Hive World. In several cases, the remaining Imperial and Ork forces on the planet had become temporarily allies to defeat this new threat to both of them. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, hit that like button, leave a comment for the algorithm, and support the channel, and make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for more of Warhammer 40,000 lore.